A couple of people just showed up, but I think for the most part we can probably start as well.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, you guys. Everybody can hear me okay, correct? All right, fantastic. So let me just share my screen here. Give me 1 second. And let me know when you can see it.
Good to go. Yeah, we got it.
All right, fantastic. Well, feel free, of course, at any point in time to interrupt me during this presentation. Again, I just want to just take a moment and thank everybody. Number one, for spending your evening with us at Ideate Software, and of course today we're going to talk about the COBie data management and also the exchange using Ideate BIMLink. Oh, and just as a little bonus, and a little bit of Ideate apps while we're at it. And so I will show you just a couple of quick workflow ideas, specifically using our renumber program. Okay, so just a little bit about me. So I'm the customer success manager for Ideate Software. We're kind of located all over the place. We're headquartered out of San Francisco, but we have offices in Portland, Oregon, up in Washington State as well. We have a few folks over there, and then a couple folks on the East Coast and also in the United Kingdom. My background is in architecture, so that's what I went to school for, got my license in. So I've dabbled both in the profession and also kind of on the software side of things. So my job with Ideate is to work with our customers, build great ongoing relationships, and make sure that everybody gets the information that they need so they're successful with the usage and implementation, both with the Revit products and also with our products as well. All right, just a little funny business to start with. I actually got an email about 2 hours ago from one of our customers down in Australia. They came across our little LinkedIn post here. And, I've been working with Tyler for the last few weeks on this presentation. And, everybody calls me Sash for short, and that's what I go by. And I had a lot of trouble typing in SaskBIM here because, well, my name is Sash, and so I've been confusing both of them for the last few weeks, and so I thought that was funny that one of our customers picked up on that as well. Okay, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown just of all of our products, and then we'll get into the COBie presentation. So we develop 5 plugins softwares for the Revit product. That's what our sole focus is on at this moment in time. And so really our software helps you simplify your Revit data challenges. I think the reason why we all get together in these user groups is to share information, share data, and share lessons learned. And so our products really help people deal with their data editing and data management challenges. And we really help take a lot of the labor that's involved with trying to manually edit things in Revit. And we really try to help you simplify that with our tools. What I am going to do here is just give you a quick slide on each one of our products. And so let's just kind of go through them here briefly, and then we'll talk about COBie and give you guys a demo. Okay, so our first product, which is the one that I will also focus on for today's presentation, is Ideate BIMLink. And so the nice thing about Ideate BIMLink is we allow you to gather your Revit model data. And when I say data, I mean a lot of data, including stuff that you would normally never see in a Revit model. But the nice thing about that is we allow you to gather your Revit model data. You construct what you want to take out to Excel, and then what you can do is you can modify that data in Excel and then bring that information back in to update your models. But the nice thing about that too is I look at BIMLink as a vehicle for just gathering data. And so even if you want to just take the data elsewhere, you can certainly do that. And so that's where BIMLink and Excel can help you out. We have a lot of customers that build custom templates that take the data from the Revit model via BIMLink and allow you to restructure that data so you can take it to other databases or simplify them or show them in some sort of summary, like cost estimation or occupancy type calculations and so forth. Our next product is Ideate Explorer. This is what I like to call a true model browser. So if you're looking for anything in your Revit models, that's what Ideate Explorer can help you out with. We can get down to a very granular level with selecting things. You can find an item through Explorer, double click on it, will take you to a view and show it and highlight it for you. You can even make a selection of elements of various categories and even further refine that selection by using a variety of parameter selections using our query. We can also audit our Revit warnings using Ideate Explorer. So if you really struggle with managing Revit warnings and you don't like the standard Revit interface, Ideate Explorer is giving you the opportunity to gather those warnings. You can rank them by severity. You can select the elements affected by warnings and then manage them all through Explorer. Really handy feature within that product. Our newest product is called Ideate Style Manager. So the nice thing about Ideate Explorer is, in addition to it being a model exploration tool, it's also a wonderful tool for auditing your Revit models. And so again, we can audit work sets and so forth using Ideate Explorer. But in addition to that, if you want to even go further, you could use Ideate Style Manager. So if you have a lot of Revit templates or families or projects that have styles that have shown up, like object style subcategories from families that have been downloaded, and you want to know where they're being used and why they're being used, that's where a product like this comes in handy. Then you can select those elements if you want to and delete those subcategories, or you can merge them with another one. And the nice thing is we tell you where these subcategories are being used. The advantage of that is you can make an informed decision whether or not you want to delete those subcategories or change them over to something else that's standard. So we handle object styles, line styles, we handle fill patterns, line patterns. We also handle things like scope boxes, which I just saw the demo of today. We also handle a lot of materials and material assets as well. So this is a wonderful tool to add to your portfolio for auditing projects. Ideate Sticky is allows you to live link your Microsoft Excel files into your Revit models. And so if you're, let's say, doing plumbing fixture calculations, or you're doing room, let's say room data sheets, or folks in the interior side have their cut sheets. If you're on the, let's say, electrical side and you're doing, let's say, your calculations or all your load calculations in Excel, this is a nice way to live link that data into your Revit models. And what's brilliant about this is when we link this information into Revit, it actually shows up under your schedules. They don't show up in drafting views. And if you go back and make changes to those Excel files, you can easily update those changes in your Revit models. And if you set it to auto update, when you, let's say, close your Revit file and reopen it, those changes will automatically reload and you'll see the changes in there. And we also support images as well. And so we have some really nice workflows just even using Sticky, but also using Sticky in conjunction with BIMLink. And so our products start having kind of a nice ecosystem where they start working really nicely together. And then our last product is actually a collection of smaller apps, and that's called Ideate Apps. And so I look at BIMLink, Explorer, Style Manager, to some extent maybe Ideate Sticky, as kind of large data. We can really handle a very large amount of information, very broad. We cover all disciplines from the AECO industry. Ideate Apps really hones in on certain workflows that we struggle with all the time, like renumbering. I'm going to show you just a brief amount of renumbering today because that's going to help me in conjunction with my COBie workflow. Or finding elements that you just cannot find in your views even though you're supposed to. Maybe you accidentally put them on a work set that's turned off or they're out of the view range. That's where a product like X-Ray comes in. Or just the day-to-day struggles of putting views on sheets and getting them to align with each other. Or creating hundreds of views that are named exactly the same way with the same scope boxes assigned, view templates, view organization parameters. That's where a product like View Creator comes in. And so we really help customers solve these issues, these kind of day-to-day or week-to-week issues with Ideate Apps. And so that's just a little bit of brief information on our products. And again, feel free to reach out to me at any point in time if you have any questions. I'm always here to help out. But let's talk about COBie, or COBie, or maybe COBie, right? Or the really fun COBie, which is the spreadsheet here. So we're actually going to talk about that. Oh, and by the way, this is all for everybody in Canada. Congratulations to your Raptors this year. I was definitely rooting for you guys. And so speaking of basketball, I was really happy when they took the championship. So anyhow, just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so why are we actually here to talk about COBie? It's not just Tyler reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, we want a presentation," but really, what the whole idea behind COBie is that the information that is really needed to run facilities or managed assets is really difficult to deal with, and really for the longest time, and even including on projects now, a lot of that information is still handed over in some sort of paper format. And sometimes what happens, especially on like the architectural side and on the construction side, is when that data needs to be handed over to the owner so they can run their projects or run their facilities, that information ends up becoming kind of a rush job. It always is the stuff that happens at the very end, especially after construction is completed. And so then it ends up in some big pile, kind of like what you see over here. I know people that actually have offices like this. I found this photo and thought, yep, that's pretty fitting for kind of an old paper deliverable that we're so used to. And this is what also happens. I've witnessed this and actually been part of this exact problem over here. But information that is needed to manage equipment and assets in a project is typically pulled off shelves and then lost, right? Or it's just not returned, or it's reorganized in a binder somewhere else. This is a very typical problem that happens all the time. And so this is why COBie is here to help out with this whole thing. Also, this is another big problem. A lot of departments, under one roof or under one campus kind of maintain their own set of records. And I can almost guarantee you there's always going to be some level of discrepancies, between that information. And let's all admit, we all work together in the AECO industry. Each industry or each person that's responsible for a deliverable has kind of a different way of delivering that information, which just makes this even more problematic. So this is where COBie can kind of come in and really help out with this whole process. So for those of you that are not familiar with COBie, I think I kind of heard some talk about COBie in the background prior to us getting started today, but what COBie, the acronym stands for, is Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. And really, the whole idea behind it is it was developed in response to deal with this disparate information, right? These binders that are getting lost, or one discipline delivering information differently than another discipline. And so we want to kind of harness this information and get some sort of standard for a deliverable to hand over to the owners so that they can manage their equipment and assets and spaces in their building. So it really is a set of specifications for equipment and spaces in a building. And of course, the goal here is to really reduce cost and improve the quality of construction handover. Okay, that's the key thing, so that it is used effectively by those managing facilities. I will also say this, if you are continually working on COBie deliverables for a variety of owners, that's a good sign. And the reason why I think that's a good sign is because, number one, it's going to make your job easier when you work on the next COBie deliverable. And it really starts making this whole process kind of uniform, not only in Canada, not only in the US, but also across the globe. The other thing too, it's important to note that, if owners have created like their own spreadsheet templates for contractors to fill in, this again becomes a issue if you are dealing with multiple owners, right? Because you're going to have to figure out their system of doing things on this project. And then when you move on to the next project, you have to figure out their system. And we can all admit it just becomes this huge process of paperwork, a lot of time researching and trying to understand and meet those owners' needs. And so trying to standardize this as much as possible is just going to make things a lot better. So again, we're here to address those disparate issues and standardize these workflows. Okay, so COBie, just to give you just a little heads up, and then we'll get into this here in a moment, was first developed, I should say, by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It was later on actually approved by the National Institute of Building Sciences as kind of their national BIM model standards. And then it's been adopted by all sorts of organizations across the globe. So it's really nice to see this kind of get standardized not only in one country or one region, but kind of across the globe. Thank you, right? Because this is a big problem when I run across all sorts of standards. So about it, what it does, it outlines all of the equipment and spaces in a building or a series of buildings, including the associated information and documentation. So again, we're exchanging construction information for operations or to operations. Okay, so again, we're managing certain assets in a building. I should also say that it identifies the content of information. I should say that has been captured and exchanged in each phase of the project to really help reduce waste associated with this current paper process that I was talking about. And so, for example, like designers may be required to provide things like space layout, right, and system layouts, maybe the type of equipment that's in those spaces, and also the location, which is really important because again, if you're working on a large project and you haven't really identified the location, where are you going to find this stuff? Then the contractor will come in, at the tail end, and they're going to actually add more granular information about the equipment, like the make and the model, things like the serial number, even any sort of maintenance information, right? They're also going to provide, manufacturer literature and warranty and replacement parts information. That stuff's going to be provided as part of the COBie deliverable. I do want to point out that it's really important to note that these requirements are phased over the life of a project. You're not just doing it all at the very end of the project or in the middle of the project. At the beginning, you may be doing some basic planning, right? And so you may be getting information from the owner about what assets may belong in a room. So you may be putting together, room data sheets and some spaces, the equipment that goes in those. During the CD phase, you're going to start getting more information, like putting schedules together, right? And you're going to start listing out those assets. And then just kind of keep that in mind, I guess, as we kind of go through the COBie process. The other thing that's really important is this is for an owner, and so they really need to define what assets are going to be managed, okay? If they just come to you and say, we want a COBie deliverable, get started, that's not going to help you, right? Because either you give them very little or you give them way too much. And so they really need to define what is going to be managed at their facilities. I do want to point out, too, that you typically don't manage, and I'll call them assets here, like floor slabs or beams. We're talking about equipment that has warranties and preventative maintenance plans or replacement parts, right? So the easy one to think of would be like mechanical units, right? VAV boxes. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about that would be managed over the life of a project. Even things like fire extinguishers. Those are the kinds of pieces of equipment that would be managed, right? Because a lot of times those require some sort of inspection process. So that's what we're talking about in terms of what would be managed. The other thing that's important, it kind of reminds me of level of development. Hopefully you guys have had that level of development conversation at prior meetings that you guys have. Well, this is kind of the same thing. You need to ask at what level of detail do these assets need to be managed, right? If they say we want to manage every little bit, we want every little bit of intricate information input in that spreadsheet, you're going to be burning through your fee really quickly. So the owner needs to come back and really kind of give you some information as to what is going to be managed as part of this COBie deliverable. Again, there can be a lot of management, shall we say, or a lot of paperwork involved with this process. The key thing is, how do we classify all this information? We're talking about COBie, that's great, but how are we actually going to classify this information? Well, there are various classifications that are out there. So the owner may actually have their own classification. Maybe in my own opinion, I'm hopefully saying hopefully not, because that could kind of go back to what I was talking about earlier, where you may have to learn one system and then on the next project you learn another. But there's uniclass, uniformat, and then the omniclass is kind of a big popular one here, especially here in the US. And that's actually one of the COBie defaults when we talk about classifying assets. So again, I'm going to show you this COBie toolkit here in BIMLink here shortly and kind of walk you through some of the basics of it. We don't have time to go through it, but we're going to be using omniclass for that. Okay, before I get into the demo, I just want to talk about how COBie and BIMLink could work together. All right, so one of the things I want to talk about is if you haven't downloaded and installed this, Autodesk does provide, and I'm using air quotes here, for free, the COBie extension for Revit. And the reason why I do it in air quotes is you already paid for Revit, so you're getting this benefit, I suppose. I will have to say, going through it, it's actually a really pretty good application. I do find some limitations to it, which that's where BIMLink can kind of come in. But I think it's a great application for setting up the COBie parameters and also classifications. Doing this stuff manually, creating all of these parameters, you don't want to do it. So let the software handle that for you. So again, great way also for setting up all of your Revit schedules. So there will be a slew of Revit schedules that will be generated with this COBie extension toolkit. And then also it will help you generate the spreadsheet exports that are used as part of the handover process to the owner. The other thing I want to point out is that COBie only requires that you export elements that are found like in the O&M manuals, right? The operations and maintenance manuals. So, as a result, just keep in mind you can remove things like structural elements, the piping, ductwork, unless the owner plans on managing that stuff or maintaining them, right? So again, kind of a general rule of thumb that I've come across is that COBie should be used, or I guess I should say that you want to export the products and equipment that really just appear in the drawings and schedules. Okay, so again, just kind of keep that in mind, right? You're going to be doing, for the mechanical folks, you'll be doing things like VAV boxes, right? Those may be maintained, or mechanical equipment. On the architecture side, even equipment like door closers, right, or hardware for doors. Some of that stuff does require maintenance. Those are the kinds of things that you want to export out as part of your COBie deliverable. But then again, the owner is going to be specifying that. Now, as I've gone through this COBie toolkit and found some of the limitations, talked to a couple folks about it that have used this a lot, some of this parameter data and management can be hit and miss. And if you're not careful, you can really kind of make a mess of things. And so this is really where a product like BIMLink or other Ideate software products can really come in and help you out. And you may just say, look, Sash, we're going to use this extension toolkit to generate the parameters, but we'll use BIMLink to do all the edits. And then when we're done doing all the edits and we're ready to kind of create that handover spreadsheet, we'll go back to the COBie extension and we're going to hit that generate spreadsheet so it can grab all that Revit model data that was inputted and push them out to their formatted spreadsheets. Okay, so it's really up to you. If you're really frustrated with this toolkit and it's a little too rigid for you, use it to generate those parameters and then kind of come back after the fact and use BIMLink to do all the edits and then push it out using the COBie toolkit again. All right, so where's BIMLink's role in COBie? It could be anywhere, right? You could say, look, like what I just told you, generate the parameters, do the rest in BIMLink. But, it's not necessarily an entire replacement. As I mentioned before, that parameter generation from that toolkit is really, really, really nice. Okay, so just having that for that makes me really happy. So I'd like to say it's a complement. It supports that workflow. The nice thing, too, is, again, you're just taking this data out to Excel using BIMLink. How you choose to edit that data is really up to you. If the owner has a really specific naming requirement, I'm going to use doors for today's example just to kind of show you the basics of BIMLink. Well, the COBie toolkit probably won't meet those requirements. When you edit that data using the COBie toolkit and push it out to Excel, it's not going to meet the owner's requirements. Well, that's where BIMLink comes in, right? So you have a lot of that flexibility at your fingertips. And I like to say that you do get very precise data management and control. We're going to report the data. You go to Excel and modify that data, pull that information back in. And when you pull that information back in, you get some nice feedback from BIMLink on what was actually modified. We highlight the information that was modified and show you what's changed. The COBie toolkit really doesn't do that stuff. So sometimes you hit that OK button, you're like, what happened? I don't really know, until you kind of start looking and sleuthing through your model to kind of see what has changed and what hasn't changed. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, before I get into the demo here, I maybe just will pause for a moment and see if anybody has, any questions for me before I do kind of demo some of the COBie toolkit and the BIMLink. So feel free to to raise your hand, I guess, and speak up.
Yeah. Got a question here.
Yeah.
What's the process for getting the data into COBie? Is that a total manual entry thing, or is that a information transfers from Revit to COBie, or what does that look like?
Okay, that's a
The
great
question is,
Oh, go ahead.
good, you got it.
Perfect. You heard it?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, so the whole process of getting that data in, right, into Revit. So the BIM operability tools, which you can download from the Autodesk website, there's no extra charge, shall we say. When you plug that in, what you will do is you can go through the setup process, and I'll demo some of that. And what that's going to essentially do is it's going to set up the parameters for you. Again, there's a lot of parameters, so if you had to go in and create all of these shared instance-based and type-based parameters, and also parameters associated with the project information, it's going to take a really, really long time, and I would have to say it's probably error-prone as well. Once you get that information set up, there's some kind of back-end setup that you can do to kind of customize how some of the parameter data is constructed. And again, just to kind of get this out there, the whole idea behind COBie versus other systems or just kind of doing it on your own is we've created a standard set of parameters, naming conventions, etc., that really anybody can use. Whether we're all in a Revit-based workflow or maybe whether we're doing something related to IFC, the whole idea is that we're all using a standard set of parameters, a standard set of inputting information, so that when you hand that over to the owner, they can understand that. Because maybe for one architect, the way they number their doors may be different than how another architect numbers their doors. And if you handed that information off to one owner, it's not going to mean much to them, right? They want it formulated in a way that their facilities folks can really understand where that door is and what that door's purpose is. And so that's the whole idea behind COBie. And so this COBie toolkit, I love it because it generates those standard set of shared parameters that are really, really important. And those shared parameters should be the same for everybody working on COBie deliverables. We'll talk a little bit about GUIDs here if you're not familiar with a global unique identifier. So that's that process. In terms of filling in the information in those parameters, the COBie toolkit will do some of that, but generally speaking, it's a manual process. So it goes back to when you talk to the owners, what information needs to be managed and to what extent. Because if they just tell you, I want you to input everything you can think of, that's not good, because you have to ask for a lot of fee because it does take a lot of time. Some of this, on the architectural or engineering side of things, you'll be required to fill out, but the contractor is going to be required to fill out that information and hand it off to the owner. And then from there, they take that information either to their FM software, however they want to manage it, but they at least have a set of documents that they can read from that are consistent. As opposed to pulling information off a shelf with a bunch of cut sheets, different binders, and things that are just so disparate and so different, nobody would really understand it. It'll end up looking like that desk that we saw in that photo. Does that kind of help maybe answer? And maybe when I get into that demo portion here, it'll help kind of make sense of some of that as well. Any other questions?
We're good on this end.
Okay, cool. All right, so I have a Revit model here, and everybody probably recognizes this project. It's probably one of the most famous Revit projects in existence. It's one of our sample files. So I'm going to kind of talk about it here in a moment. So, here's kind of the BIM operability tools plugin. And again, you get this as part of your Revit subscription. Just you can go in and download it. The two main focuses that I'm going to be working on today are the classification manager over here and this kind of COBie extension over here. And there is some help here if you do have questions about how to use it. Some of the help's okay. I found that you just have to kind of just go through it and really wrap your head around it, but it's actually not too bad. At first, I was very intimidated by it, and I was like, this isn't so bad. So a couple things that you want to do to start with is start, with your classification manager. And so this kind of helps to pick the database that you want to use for classifying your elements that will be ultimately managed as part of your COBie deliverable. And so you can see over here, like the Omni class is one of them. So this is kind of a standard baseline COBie database, or that's used by COBie. But again, if the owner has their own system, you can certainly use that, or you can use these other systems here as well. And it kind of tells you where it's actually pulling this information from. You could also browse to an existing Excel file if you have your own, but this will kind of set some basic parameter data. So I'll hit finish over here. And it did something. It just happened so fast we didn't really get a chance to kind of see it. And then afterwards, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to assign a classification for the facility, right? Because all this information gets dumped out ultimately to a COBie spreadsheet, which I'm going to show you here kind of at the end. This is what ultimately gets handed over to the owner. Okay, so we'll get into this here kind of at the very end here. So you can see here there's multiple classifications, right? And so what I'll do is maybe I'll just pick like this being like a research facility. It just sounds really cool to do something like a science, based facility. When you do this, one of the things I want to point out to you that's not as obvious is the set COBie parameters. What this is going to do once you do this is it's going to push this information right here into the project information section of the Revit model. And everybody should be familiar with the project information portion of the Revit model. The one thing they don't tell you about this, which is kind of a bummer, is if you actually don't do your project setup, you'll get an error message that says, hey, that parameter doesn't exist. So I'm kind of a left to right person. I would have expected this to kind of be in the order that I want it to. So what you may want to do is do some of the project setup first and then come back and assign it a classification. I already kind of went through the setup just for the interest of time. So that parameter has already been created by the COBie extension. So I'll show it to you here in a moment. But let's just go ahead and do this. I'll go ahead and assign it, and so it's assigned this information in the COBie parameter because I said, hey, go ahead and set it. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. So where you're going to spend probably the most time at the beginning is through this project setup. Let me just launch this to kind of show you what this is. And I'm not going to get into every detail here because we could be here for quite a bit of time. But, there's some general settings in here, right? So again, thinking about the units and the locality of the project, right? And then this one here is a really important one. It's this global unique identifier. And for those of you that have dug into the Revit database, either using BIMLink, or if you've used other third-party software out there, maybe you've dabbled in some Dynamo, you've probably come across this GUID. And actually, for those of you that love parameters, especially shared parameters, the GUID is where it's all about. I would recommend, in terms of identifying elements, you want to do by the GUID. And the reason why is this GUID's a very large hexadecimal number, and the chances of you coming across another GUID with the exact same number and everything in another project is very, 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 very slim. The chances of you coming across multiple Revit models with the same element ID numbers, very good chance, right? And so I would export your data, and you'll see this in action here in a bit, via the GUID, okay? Just kind of keep that in mind. And then you can set your units if they are different from your project. So default would grab the project units. Otherwise, if you want to change them up, you can do that. And then in terms of how you want things to be measured, there's the standard Revit default calculation method, or you can use, like one of the BOMA ones, which I've done some studies on BOMA as well. It's really up to you. So you kind of do that. I like to kind of hit save each time I kind of go through each one of these. And then what you want to do is when you export this stuff out to the spreadsheet, you need to identify kind of where this equipment is located. And so we call it spaces. It kind of reminds me of Bluebeam because Bluebeam uses rooms, right? So in Revit, when you export information from Revit to Bluebeam using the Bluebeam printer, it calls rooms spaces. Well, COBie also calls room spaces and spaces spaces. So just kind of keep that in mind. What you're trying to do is identify these categories of elements based on whether you're going to identify them via a room or via a space. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you just kind of reset it to defaults, it'll do that. You can say I want to do room for all, space for all. It's really up to you. Or again, you can kind of reset to defaults. And then in terms of how the spaces will be named using the COBie parameters, which I'll show you here, and you can see right here, it's going to fill in a parameter called COBie.space.name. Okay, that's going to be the parameter that the data gets filled in. You're trying to define how that is going to be named for each one of the space names. So by default, it's using the Revit category, whether it's room or space, followed by an underscore, followed by the number for that room or for that space. When it finds it, boom, it's going to concatenate that data and name that space based on that information. Okay. And then in here, we're specifying types. All right, we're talking about type-based parameters. COBie has both type and instance-based parameters. So again, I won't go into all of this information. And these little help topics kind of tell you what is going to be filled in and what this information means as well. So I just want to kind of point that out to you. But again, you want to define how your type-based information and your instance-based information, the components. And right here it tells you it's going to be called the COBie.component.name. We're not using these kinds of parameters as kind of our COBie deliverable. We're using the COBie-based parameters, the universal ones that everybody will understand. So we have to tell this extension how to push data into these parameters using this information. This is where the limitations can happen because again, you can come in here and pick really kind of any of this information, including custom if you want to. You can do custom-based parameters, right? Over here are manual-based. But again, the issue with this is very restrictive. So if doors have to have DR in front of it and windows are WDW and furniture is FURN, that's not going to help out when you pick Revit category because it's going to name it doors, not DR, or windows, not WDW. So this is where BIMLink is going to be your friend. I'm going to demo this for you in a moment. All right, and then we talk about systems, right? So we're talking about the actual systems that are involved, right? That's more of the MEP systems that we're talking about. So again, you're going to define those settings. And then choose other Revit parameters to export to the COBie attribute spreadsheet. Again, you're doing some setup here in the Revit model. You can actually see I already had done some here, right? But then what is going to be exported out to the spreadsheet? So you can come in over here and define other Revit parameters that you may want to dump out to that spreadsheet. So maybe the owner has other requirements above and beyond that spreadsheet where they want to maybe see something from the doors. Maybe they want to see the construction type for some bizarre reason, right? So in addition to the standard COBie parameters, you can also dump this information out as well. This is another important one, coordinates. So in addition to identifying the elements via, let's say, a COBie name, you can also locate them via their XYZ coordinates or XYZ coordinates, right? So component families would be based on their bounding box, or it could be based on a location point or location line. And floors would be bounding box and so forth. So this will all get spit out, shall we say, in this spreadsheet. And then the schedules. We're talking about choose which Revit schedules to create in your Revit model to help with the COBie field. So these are going to be the schedules that COBie is going to actually generate for you in your Revit models. Okay. So again, if the owner has no plans on managing doors at all or windows, don't create a schedule in here only to have somebody fill it out when they don't need to, right? So keep that in mind. We want to be cognizant of the information and not overload people with so much extra data. You've all run into extra data before in the Revit models. It's a very time-consuming thing to fill that out when you didn't need to. So kind of keep that in mind. And this one's a little intimidating. I don't want to get too much into it, but basically these are the parameters that are used for the settings and also for exporting. So it's going to pick up the information that's been filled in with these parameters and spit it out into the spreadsheet that gets handed over to the owner. So by default, the COBie toolkit you know, will generate these parameters for you. But if for some reason let's say the name, right, the component name, which is basically an instance-based parameter, if you wanted that to be assigned to a different Revit parameter, you could certainly do that. I'm just going to leave these all, you know, at default. So again, there's a lot to this. I don't have time to get into it, but I don't want you to be intimidated by it. It's actually not that bad. So again, talk to the owners, you know, find out what these requirements are for deliverables. You may find that not all of this information is going to be managed. So don't just assume yes to everything and hit save and boom, you got it, you're happy. Really kind of work through that with them to identify what needs to be taken care of. Once you hit the save and close button, what Revit's going to do is it's going to generate all the parameters for you. I'm going to show you those. And it's also going to generate all these schedules. There are a couple schedules in here that will not get generated. I just duplicated these and added parameters for BIMLink, and I'll show you why. But generally speaking, it's going to create those schedules based on what you told it to create. So to do this manually or try to create it in a template file and use transfer project standards, I'm a big fan of doing it this way. Okay, so, you know, there's kind of that. And of course, if it was the first round of doing it, it's going to take a moment. And the other thing that's important to do is whoever's working on this project and whoever is going to be exporting out these spreadsheets along the way in the process, again, you may be exporting out this information at various stages of a project. You want to create a contact list for them. So you'll come in here, put their information, and then once you start adding more, right, when you come in here and add a contact, like, you know, Bob Jones or something in here, let me just do that, you know, Bob Jones, you know, right here. By the way, we don't have a Bob Jones that works for Ideate, but if we did, that'd be great. So, okay, and then so forth, right? So once you do this and do all of that, when you hit the save button, let's see, I probably have to fix this over here. This person's going to be a owner. Once you do that, you can then save that to the Bob Jones, right? And so now you can come over here and have a contact list if you want to. Also helps to get their last name right. Okay, so you'll be creating a contacts list. Okay, now that you've done that, let's take a look and get an understanding here of what just happened. I got schedules, right? So let's just take a quick look at the door one, just as an example. So the door one here is, you know, it says this schedule includes the default parameters from the COBie toolkit, which is great because they're shared parameters. You know, if you have any of the map parameters, you saw that earlier, they're not reflected here. And the reason why is these were all generated by the COBie toolkit. Okay. You can add fields to this thing if you want to, and it's not going to have any effect on the export because the COBie toolkit's going to look for certain parameters and the data and export that out. So if you came in and added a whole bunch of other schedule information, it doesn't matter. I'm probably a bigger fan of duplicating that schedule, like this one here, and modifying it and doing whatever you know, I want to, and saying, hey, if somebody needs to come in and work in this schedule manually, you know, do it. But you can see the difference here, like the name, for example. Well, this is actually the family name, right? You know, the type name. This is a standard Revit parameter that's already filled in from the type, but this isn't going to meet the COBie deliverable requirement. You need to fill in the type name here. Now, if you had to come in here manually and do that, wow, that's going to be a lot of information. Well, that's where BIMLink and this COBie toolkit can help you out. So here's what I want to do. I just want to show you something here. Let me just pick a door just to kind of show you what parameters were created, just as an example. You could see over here that when I went through the BIM operability tools and did the project setup and hit OK, it already created the shared parameters and it mapped them to the appropriate categories. Okay, you can always turn categories off through just the manage project parameters, right? You can come to project parameters as the owner says, no, Sash, you know, we're not going to be dealing with doors. Then we can come in here and say, hey, we don't want to manage this parameter for doors, right? You can certainly do that. But in this case, maybe we are going to manage doors. Maybe we're going to manage the latch sets, maybe the closers, etc. Okay, but this is the information that's going to ultimately get filled in for the owner and exported out as part of this spreadsheet. The owner is not going to see the mark value. This doesn't really mean anything to them. This universal information does. Now you can certainly come in here and manually edit this, and you'll be here for a very long time. But this is where this this update can come in handy. So let me just show you kind of a real base here. First and foremost, if I come back to the project setup, just as an example, and I come back to the COBie component, and again, I don't like the way they named it. We're really talking about the instance-based parameter for the COBie component name. It's going to use the Revit category and the mark value. So in this case, it's going to be called doors dash or underscore in this case. It'll be doors underscore 322. So at some point in time when you're responsible for exporting this information out, you want to make sure that at least your numbering convention is correct. Well, you can see here that maybe this isn't. If I look at my first floor plan, just as an example here, my numbering convention is kind of like this, but on my third floor, it doesn't match. So I'm going to just show you one of the ways that you can do some quick renumbering, and that's through Ideate Software's renumber. And so I'm going to renumber my rooms, which I drew a kind of a path through here using just detail lines that have connected endpoints, right? It's a chain of lines. And I'm just going to use our standard kind of room one, and I'm just going to make this start at 03-001, and it's going to look something like that. And I'm just going to select my path using the renumbering along a vertex. And when I do that, I'll just do that and hit accept changes, and all my rooms have been renumbered that quickly, right? So again, I'm trying to help the COBie toolkit be a little more efficient and ensure that my numbering conventions are correct. And then for my doors, I need to match those with the room numbers. That may be an owner requirement, right? So the owner may have their own numbering system, especially if you're working on hospitals and so forth. So I'll do doors using the from room option. I'll have the letter A, B, C. And again, if you want to know more information about this, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to show you guys this stuff, but I'm going to auto number it by view and go ahead and hit accept changes. And when I'm done, you could see here like 03001 goes into there, and we could see A and B here. So it picked up the room information and automatically numbered my doors really quickly. Okay, so now I can start thinking about, okay, well, how do I want to start using BIMLink to set up the schema for my numbering? Well, one of the things I want to point out to you is first and foremost, what you have to do is if you want the COBie data to be written in here, you need to turn on this switch by hitting that checkbox right there. When you do that, and then you come up to the BIM operability tools and do update, it's going to read the project setup information and update the information based on what you told it to do. Okay, so one of the downsides is, I mean, you could probably select all the doors in this case and turn on checkboxes all at once, but let me show you how BIMLink can help you with that. So like, for example, for BIMLink, I created a schedule here that said doors, you know, for BIMLink, and it includes this COBie checkbox right here. All I did is I copied the COBie one, and then I added a few parameters in here. And then when I come to Ideate Software and I come to BIMLink, what's neat about this, let me just go, I'll leave this one here because I already did it, but I can actually create from a schedule using that one right there. And what I want to do is I want to edit the instance-based parameters, okay, like the door marker, unconnected height. So what it's going to do is it's going to grab all the instance-based parameters and allow them to be edited. All right, so now when I look at it over here, you could see all of the parameters here. But it's also showing type-based parameters, but we gray them out so you don't accidentally edit them, okay? And we can see here we have 100. But why is this important? Well, number one, my mark values have been numbered, so that's really nice. And you can also see that the COBie is also here. And what I want to do is I want to use BIMLink to turn on these attributes. This is one of the ways that you can do this. In addition, I can add other parameters to this spreadsheet export if I want to. Okay, so that's kind of how this works. I look at BIMLink as a way for you to build a really amazing schedule of data that gets exported to Excel. And we're talking about other bits of information that you'll never see in a Revit model, right? We can schedule all of that information and take that out if we want to. I can even schedule the coordinate data if I want to, right? And so I can take that out. And it's not going to have any effect on the COBie information, but I can get you the coordinate data of that information if I want to. Okay, I'll take this and I'm going to export it out. And what I'll do is I will just go ahead and put it here. And I'll show you how easy it is to do this. And I'm actually showing you this from a schedule. When I come in over here, here's your Excel file, right? And so again, everything in gray is not editable. I can certainly edit it here, but when I bring it back in, BIMLink's going to say, hey, you can't do that. I'm going to skip over it. But anything in white is editable. If I wanted to change my family out and actually do a swap, for example, I guess I could do that, or I can rename this family if I want to. But for my first round, what I want to do is I want to turn on all of these doors and say I want to push the COBie data into it. And just like that, I'm making it true. All right, look how fast that was, right? A fill down. Okay, now watch this. I'll just kind of move this off to the side because I want you to keep an eye over here. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that right here. And remember, I told you that we give you a nice feedback loop, right? Right here, everything in yellow is what's changed. Here, no errors and warnings. And if I had any errors and warnings, I can save that out to an Excel file and come back and review them later. The current Revit value before I hit import is false, and it's going to become true once it's done. Okay, here we go. Let me just kind of make this smaller. Watch this. When I hit import, boom, just like that. Okay, so just like that, I was able to turn those on. Now, oops, let me come over here. The reason why this one's turned on, I don't know where this is or why this is, but I'm actually kind of all right with it because I want to show you what happens maybe when these are not checked. Okay. All right, so that's great. I got that done, but now let me show you what the BIM operability tool is going to do. Based on your project setup, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come over here and do an update. Okay, and this is where you can get yourself in a lot of trouble, and this is where the COBie toolkit, I believe, is a little too restrictive when you need to set up naming conventions per the owner's way when the Revit way may not work. So one of the things I want to point out to you is, in this case, I'm just going to update all parameters, okay? So I'm going to update every parameter in here as long as that checkbox is turned on, okay? And then what I'll do here is I'm going to update all parameters and hit apply and close. And what it's going to do is it's going to come in and it's going to build or concatenate the data and fill in the information for those doors. And you see what it did right there. So the question that came up, like, how's this information filled in? Well, it's partially filled in, okay? So here you can see this is called doors that, but the owner has their own requirement, okay? But you can see the created by, well, that showed up because, and I forgot to show that to you, that showed up when I went to hit the update button. I picked who created it. If Bob Jones now created this export and I hit that right there, you'll see that the created by should switch over to Bob Jones, okay? So we'll give it a moment. So this is kind of fast, right? And it updates the date and everything, but this is concatenating this data. But we have a little bit of a limitation. The owner wants us to be DR underscore, not doors, okay? So this is that problem with the COBie toolkit. So this is where BIMLink can further support this. I'll come back to BIMLink now. I'll take this, and if I double click on it and look at it, we should see here that same information in those checkboxes, and we can see that parameter data there. And by the way, notice that these were blank. Pardon me here. These were blank. That's because those were not turned on. That's why it didn't fill in. So let me show you this now. I'll come back to Ideate BIMLink, and let's export this. I'm going to replace that first spreadsheet because that first spreadsheet was the one where I put those checkboxes in. Now I just want to replace it. And now I'm going to open it. Okay, and when I open that file, here's that information, right? And so now what I can do is I can just do a simple Control F as an example of find, and I'll replace doors with DR, right? Because that's what the owner required. Even though the COBie toolkit used the category underscore door number, that's not an owner requirement, and we can't use a COBie toolkit for this. I need to use, and of course it always helps when you select that and then do that. So now we'll just go ahead and replace all, and you see just like that we did 98 of these things, right? And so this is where you can come in here and do other bits of information. I can say these are doors, right, as part of a description. And so this is where the contractor or you, the architects or designers, have to come in and fill in some of this data. The nice thing is I can take this info right here using BIMLink, spit it out to Excel, hand it to somebody, say, can you fill this out? When you're done, give it to me, and I'm going to bring that info back in. And when you do that, I'm just going to take that Excel spreadsheet, I'm going to hit open. All right, no errors and warnings. There's that feedback loop, right? This is what I was telling you that BIMLink gives you where the COBie toolkit doesn't. And we could see some of the changes in here. It was blank, and now it's going to become doors. And when I hit OK and close, this is a Windows issue, by the way, where that flips, you can see how these are noted, right? And then take a look over here, it filled in the rest of that COBie data. But serial numbers, like that's going to have to be manually filled in. You can do it here, or take it out with BIMLink, have somebody fill it in Excel, and pull that information back in. So this is just some of the ways that BIMLink can complement this. And then finally, when you're done, let me just hit the save button here. When you're done, or you're required to hand, maybe this information off at schematic design or design development, then what you can do is go to create that spreadsheet that I was telling you about. And we can export out all this information, right? We're going to generate these sheets in here. I'll say where I want to COBie export for owner, something like that. And I put a 4 after it apparently, and then I'll hit create spreadsheet. And what it's going to do is it's going to grab this data, and it's going to use the toolkit to actually create a specially formatted spreadsheet. Okay, so yes, we do edits here manually or using BIMLink, but at some point this create spreadsheet needs to grab this data that's been filled in and send it out to its own formulated spreadsheet, which this is a whole nother animal in and of itself. But like the contact list is right here. So this is your contact sheet that's generated in a COBie based format, right? The facility information is here, and this is who last exported this information on this date. The reason why you don't see any floor based information here is because if I go to, let's say, a floor plan, and I come over like here to a building section, I never turned this on for COBie. You see that right there? So I'm not going to get any floor information. So this is what I was talking about. You need to turn these things on. Let BIMLink help you with that. Let's make that go really fast. Okay. But so anyhow, I won't go through all of these, but as I turn on spaces and zones, this information will start filling in. Here's that component list, right? There it is. There are my doors. Who created it? And then how do we find these doors? Well, it's through the GUID. That's that global unique identifier, that really long number, not by the Revit element ID number. So that was that setting in there where we want to use the GUID. This is one of the ways to find it. And just to let you know, BIMLink also can list the GUIDs of these information, so you can easily find these things if you want to. Okay, and so that's kind of what I was talking about. Here's your component, and then the coordinate information. If you need to know the coordinate information, this is what I was talking about, like the bounding box, right? Some of this stuff is going to look very foreign, and it's even foreign to me, but maybe for a facility management software or somebody managing facilities, this stuff means a lot more to them. They can find where maybe this door is based on this coordinate data. And the whole idea is whether you're using, an IFC formatted model through like ArchiCAD, you're using a Revit model with multiple disciplines, the idea is that this COBie data and the way this information is exported is consistent across the board because of parameters like these. So a lot to cover, in a short amount of time, but I wanted to just kind of give you a brief intro to COBie. I don't want you to be intimidated by this, but BIMLink, not only handles COBie data, but it handles all sorts of your Revit model data for all sorts of categories, and you can customize this as much as you want, but it is for every discipline. If we can edit it in a Revit model, we can edit it in BIMLink and even go further by creating new elements. So this is just a small portion of what BIMLink can do by supporting the COBie workflow, and we actually have some built-in COBie links that ship with BIMLink, which is really nice. And I got so excited about this, I'm going to create some new ones, and we're going to hopefully get them integrated into BIMLink with the next release. So we'll stay tuned to that. So any questions for me before we kind of close this out? Hopefully this made sense, or hopefully I didn't overwhelm people.
I do have one question here.
Yeah.
So when you send over the final owner Excel COBie data, how do you generate that through multiple consultants? So we're all working in, right now, we're all working in different linked models.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I'm seeing it at the moment is each consultant will create their own COBie file, but as an end result, you want one single one. How do you see the different consultants working together on that?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure about that. What I can do is get back to you, because I have a good friend who's actually actively involved right now on a COBie project. So I'll reach out to her and find out how are they handling that process. So I guess you could do it, two ways, right? So is this a COBie export for, architectural based elements, right? Versus is there another spreadsheet that's, again, formatted the same exact way, because you can see how this tool will format these the exact same way. Is there another spreadsheet that's related for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, depending on if any structural elements will be managed by COBie. So that's possibly one way. Do you do it by linking spreadsheets, right? Because you can actually link spreadsheets together. That's another way. So I'll actually reach out to my friend and find out, and then I'll get back to you guys on that, because I'd like to know how are they handling that handover to the owner, and the owner may actually have their own requirements for that as well.
Yeah, Josh, it's Tyler here. I've actually done a lot of research on this, and my thought process has changed a little bit. I'm partial to a deliverable per discipline rather than a combined data set.
Okay, perfect.
Because it does give you another level of management. If the owner wants to combine that data, they can on their own terms. But for us, we don't want to complicate that handoff, and we don't want to complicate it for them either. If they decide they want to consolidate it, they can do that. And
Plus,
that's my help.
Yeah, and again, thinking of responsibility, I can only imagine, like, if, let's say you're on the architecture side and you're the one responsible for handing this over to the owner at the end of the day, or the contractor is, and then them getting kind of a pile of data that may need some more work, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm responsible for this now, as opposed to the disciplines that need to get the data straightened out before they hand it over to you to hand over to an owner. So having it separated, I'm kind of cool with that as well. I guess it all just depends on what probably the owner wants as well, but I'm with you on that, Tyler. It's the same as, architects are responsible for the architecture side, the mechanicals, mechanical, and so forth, even though, yes, there's a high level coordination that has to happen, but each discipline is required to manage kind of their scope.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to a crystal clear asset information execution plan. Highlighting scope and the level of detail. I think that's what it comes down to. And how the end customers are going to use it, whether they're going to leave it in this format or put it into an system like our plan. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
Yep. Absolutely. Any other questions?
I think that was a great presentation, Sash.
Yeah, that was very good.
Thanks, you guys. Yeah, and I'll just kind of leave you maybe with a kind of a final slide here, but check out our website. You can also download trials of our software. At that link. Feel free to email me with any questions that you have, or if you want to know more. I like to say we have really awesome customer service. I really enjoy helping people out. And so I would love to hear from you folks. If you have any questions, let us help you out. Let us help you solve your data management and data editing challenges. We're definitely here to help out. And if you have any other questions about the COBie, let me know, and I can certainly put you in touch with the right people if you do have any questions. So again, I do appreciate, Tyler, thank you so much for all the phone calls and, emails back and forth on helping me get some questions answered, and also just kind of setting the expectation. Really enjoyed this presentation and working with you guys. I actually had a lot of fun putting this together too. So thank you for that.
We appreciate your time, Sash. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And everybody have a great rest of your evening, and have a great weekend as well. And we'll catch up soon.